Hi Studiospares, I'm Alex Jan from Audio Technica, the UK distributor for Allen Heath. We're here today to take a look at the Q-16 and to find a bit more information about the Q series. Thanks. Allen Heath wanted to create a very simple and easy to use digital desk, and they wanted people that are familiar with analog to be able to come to a digital desk and not be freaked out by lots of different menus, etc. They wanted it to be very much familiar to that sort of classic analog sort of workflow. So really good stepping stone for people wanting to go from an analog setup into using a digital console, but don't like the idea of lots of different sub-menus, etc. to really get going. Think of this kind of like a digital mix wizard, really, and I think that's one of the sort of real key features about it, and it's that easy to use. So, as I said, they've designed it specifically to have that same kind of feel. So, for example, the local connections which are on the rear, which you'll probably should see on a different image later, the connections that are on the rear physically connect up pretty much sort of one for one across the 16 channels. We've then got a sort of main control section on this super strip here, which really is a one knob per function, which we'll come to in more detail in a moment. And then obviously we have our 16 plus our master fader along the bottom here. So these are motorized faders, I must stress as well. But as I said, the signal path for the local connection really is analog connection 1, fader 1. And then we can easily select and focus, shall I say, this super strip by using the select keys here quite easily. So as I said, really must stress the simplicity of this desk. Now, it's not just local connections that you can work with. Oh no, with this desk you are able to work with 3 different types of sources. So we can have a local connection on the rear. Maybe we're using a USB connection from a computer or a hard drive. At the moment I'm doing a virtual sound check using the Allen Heath Q drive, which is just installed onto this disc, and I can do 18 channels of audio, which is our 16 channels and our stereo channel as well. So it will let you do audio to and from the Q drive. So again, maybe you've got a theatre production and you want to do a bit of an intro or something, you could do that from your DAW if you've got the USB-B connection on the rear, or you can use the Q drive, which is just a hard drive here. This is one of the ones that's on the list of approved ones on their website, and you can choose between either the USB-B or the hard drive, the Q drive should I say. Now obviously, so we've got local and USB, but also it is compatible with the audio racks. So we do the audio rack, this one I don't know if you can see, it's the AB168, which is the latest one, and this really is a great little partner actually to the Q16. So it'll give me my 16 inputs and also 8 outputs as well. So I could easily use this for quite a small format gig or something like that. All we do is connect up 120 meters of Cat5 if needed, that's our max length, put this on our stage, and then we put this up front of house. Then you've got a very, very powerful little live setup. Or maybe, again, a lot of people, because we'll come to it in a bit more information about the recording capabilities of this desk, this could be a really nice little partner to doing some quite, powerful recordings, really. And we'll come to that in a little bit later on. There are 16 local connections for our inputs coming into the desk. Now, it really doesn't hold back on the outputs either. So we do have a total of 10 mix outputs here as well. Now these are really, really useful if you want to sort of group music or channels or audio together to send out to separate processing, but also when used in a live setup, that's really, really a lot of outputs for your monitors, as an example. We'll come to that in a moment really, and just sort of seeing the workflow there. We've obviously got our main left-right XLR output, and there's also 3 stereo inputs as well, 2 on the rear, left and right, and then on the top of the unit, which I'll show you in a moment, it's got a little 3.5mm jack as well, so good for wanting to play a media player or something directly into the desk. Maybe you have some playback between some audio between bands or acts, etc. Now we do also have some other quite interesting connections here as well. Now obviously, with it being a digital mixer, we've got AES output as well. But very, very importantly, and as like I mentioned already about working with the audio rack, we do have the Allen Heath D-Snake connection as well. So this is where I can connect up my Cat5 cable and then send that, as I said, maximum 120 meters to the stage or wherever it is that's set up. I've mentioned the USB-B port, that is also on the rear. But one of the most important features really I think about this desk is the network connection. Now, This is a really powerful feature, because with the network connection you can easily hook up a dedicated Wi-Fi router, and then using the free QPad app on an iPad you can then easily take control of the console remotely, which I think is really useful when you're doing things like setting up monitors, etc., or maybe doing a headphone mix if you're working in a studio. So we've seen a little bit about the input and output. Now we want to sort of find out, how do we work with all these sources and how do we use this really powerful little desk. Now we focus, as I mentioned already, the superstrip here and the touchscreen as well, which I must add, by using these select keys here. So let's say, for example, let's select channel 1. So all we do is hit the select. That's now focused this. Now on our function key here, which you should be able to see, if I press that, now we've got a very simple screen which pops up. Now if I select all, I'm going to click local, and notice how they've all gone red. That now is physically waiting for the local connection on the rear. Now, as we mentioned, maybe we've got a stage set up and we've got this AB16-8 audio rack at our stage. Then we just simply press D-Snake. Now they've all gone yellow. So now our inputs, those 16 channels plus the stereo channels, will be coming directly from our digital snake input. We have our USB node. Now USB, at the moment it's set to USB-B streaming. So that means when we've got a USB cable connected to our USB-B port on the rear, if we're using our favourite DAW, it will actually see that as a multi-channel sound card. So it's actually 18 in and 18 out sound card built into this as standard. So as I said, maybe you've got a certain element of your band's performance, like a string section or a synth section or a bed or something like that. You can have easily that audio coming through the desk and then maybe mix up different sources alongside it. Now one way to sort of demonstrate that, I think, and if I deselect these, let's say on our first 8 channels we've got local connections. Maybe we've got some wireless microphones, so perhaps for our stage, for example, and then maybe we've got, I don't know, a synth and some guitar cabs on stage. Maybe we use a D-Snake, so now they've gone yellow. So I'm just using the all and none button here. And then maybe for the last channels we'll set up to be Q drive or USB-B. So notice I've got audio coming through here from my Q drive. But notice how simple it was to set up my whole show quite easily just using this little screen here. So as I said, using the all button, it can all be local or all be USB. Or we can easily mix between any of the above. So local, D-Snake, or USB. It really is your choice on what you want to do. So very easy to get going really with this console, as you can see. Now for the purpose of this demonstration, I'll obviously just leave it with Q drive so we can see some audio being played back. Obviously we can't hear the audio, we wanted to talk more about the features rather than necessarily showing you a mix in progress. So that's getting our inputs assigned to the desk. Now, for example, now if we wanted to start sculpting our mix, as we all do, as I keep saying, you focus your channel using the select, and then we can do things like maybe a high pass filter. Very simple. To engage, all you do is press the in button, and then we can control the amount using the encoder above it. It's exactly the same with the parametric EQ. So we engage it by pressing in, and then we've got things like our gain, our frequency, and also maybe our Q amount as well. So if you want to shape the Q of that band, then that's possible there as well. I must stress that because it does have a fully fledged touchscreen as well, if I then press the parametric EQ on screen, now you can easily see exactly what you're doing. And maybe you want to do a different type, like maybe you want more of a shelf or something like that. No problem, you just use the screen and then you can use your encoder to change the setting of that type of EQ as well. And again, it's exactly the same. You can adjust the frequency if people want to have very much a visual feedback with the number, or as I said, it's one knob per function, so it's quite easily laid out to use this section only. Now that's our EQ and high passing, so again quite useful ways of sculpting our sound. Next up, and any of you that have done a lot of live and also in the studio, you'll know the importance of having to use lots of additional processors as well to be able to start really controlling a lot of your sounds. So Allen Heath have thrown a hell of a lot of features into this desk. So not only do we have a fully parametric EQ here, we do also have a gate and compressor per input as well. So that's a really, really neat feature. Say for example we want to work with the compressor. Now I think if my memory serves me correctly that channel 6 was a bass, just to use as an example. Let's just turn it up a little bit. Now we can see that there's a peak coming in here because our peak light is lit and on the compressor as well, if you can see that. Speed is so important in a live setting, especially working with larger PAs. So to engage that compressor, all we need to do is turn it on and then turn our threshold down, and it's compressing. So our peak light is now gone from the compressor and we're compressing. So it's very, very simple, one knob per function. Now obviously we wouldn't necessarily do it like that, but I was just trying to demonstrate the purpose of when we want to see maybe when to engage a compressor. Now a lot of you will say, well hold on, there's a lot more to a compressor than just the threshold. How do I take control of it in much more detail? Obviously, you know, as I said, speed is of the essence in a live setting. You want it to just act and do what it needs to do when you activate it. But now when we use the touchscreen, I was on parametric here, and now I go to compressor, we can now change different settings like our threshold in more detail, ratio, maybe we want just more of a simple ratio, makeup gain as well, which can be adjusted there, and again things like attack and release time. There's also different flavours of it as well. So say for example we want a slow opto compressor, then that will be a little preset there for you as well. So, and again, while we talk about presets, using that function key again, we have a library which you can either add to yourself or there is a factory library as well, which is quite useful. Again, maybe you want to say, right, bass A as an example, we recall it, then that will put a preset directly onto that compressor setting. It's a good starting point sometimes, so maybe you want to take it in more detail from there, but you know, just again, getting that workflow a lot quicker using a digital desk over, say, an analog setup. The gate is exactly the same story. Now, let's say Tom's, if I remember rightly, we're on this channel. Actually, we keep saying if I remember rightly, but one of the nice things about this desk is you can actually name your channels as well using that touchscreen. So let's call this Tom's, assuming that it is, and maybe this one bass. So it's already named, so bass 1. So it's easily recognisable what channel you're on. So when you use the select key, it will quite clearly state at the top of the screen what channel we've selected. So at the moment we've got our toms on. Now what do we want to do to a tom? Now after we've EQ'd it, maybe a little bit of compression, we'll probably want to gate it so we kind of cut out a lot of the sound of the other drums which may interfere with our signal. So we really want them to cut through. So again, exactly the same way that compressor's a one knob per function, we engage it by using in, and then we turn the threshold down to start gating. Now, in exactly the same way that you use the compressor setting using the touchscreen, you can then go into the gate setting using the touchscreen and adjust the things like depth, maybe your attack time, release time, hold time, all the important things that you would want to take control of with such a gate, then that is possible to do that there. So very, very easy to work with it. Obviously, as I said, it's dedicated one knob per function, so we do have a pan there as well. So you can easily start getting your whole mix ready using that very, very powerful strip. So that's working with inputs. Now, maybe next up, we want to maybe add some effects to our mix. So we want to make sure we can add a bit of space, maybe to some drums or, you know, overall ambience of our performance. I must stress that the Q series have 4 very, very powerful effects. Now, the effects are straight from the iLive, and also the GLD uses very similar effects. So anyone familiar with those very, very, you know, powerful consoles, which this really borrows a lot of technology from, we've got the 4 dedicated effects processors under their own dedicated page here. So really simple, clear laid out GUI. And again, we've got a library there. So maybe someone says, look, I want just a bit of a delay. Let's say Kraftwerk delay. That was one of my favourite delays on here. And we click recall. Now we've loaded up our delay unit. So very, very simple to work with. Now I must stress that on the 24 and the 32, you actually have 4 effects mixes, but on the Q-16 you still have the 4 effects processors like its larger relations, but you have to use perhaps some of the mix outputs to get a dedicated mix a different dedicated mix going for that. But sometimes maybe you only need the 2 kind of mix selects really for effects, because maybe you're inserting effects. Now with that being said, say for example we've got a gated reverb. So on effects 4 we've got our dedicated gate reverb, which has already been set up for me. If I go to the rear of the panel, we can easily assign it as an insert and tell it to insert maybe on input 2, which is my snare. Click apply and engage the insert. We've got a dry wet mount as well, so you can really take control of that effect. Now that effect is inserted directly onto that particular input. So that's a really, really simple way to be able to put that effect directly onto that channel. Now, obviously, if we say, for example, we're working with a reverb. Now, I'll just load up a different reverb just so you can see exactly what I mean. So the SMR reverb, spatial modelling reverb, really sounds great, and it's one of my favourite reverbs. I think the EMT plate is very good quality. Now if I go back to that rear panel, like where I just set up the insert, now we want it to set up as a mix return on effects 1. If we click apply, so now when I press this mix select on effects 1, we're now able to come away from our left right mix, which is our front of house. Go to effects 1, everything's down at the bottom. So now if I say for example I wanted to put some reverb onto my snare, I then just turn that fader up, and in exactly the same way you used to use an auxiliary to send out to an effects unit, it's exactly the same process, but it uses the faders in particular. So say for example snare, maybe some cymbals, maybe a little bit on the vocal or whatever, and you can easily mix like that. So that will then send the effect to the effects unit on our effects bus, should I say. And then that will then return, if I go to my top layer here, my left and right, which I use to select using the select key here, you can see that my effects send and return is now coming back to the left right. So I would hear that on my front of house. So really easy to work with effects with this unit. Okay, so we've sculpted our sound, we've maybe added some dynamics, and we've also now applied some effects. If it's being used in a live setup, now perhaps we'd want to maybe start thinking about monitors. So I've already mentioned how we can flick between the left, right, and also our effects mixes as well. It's exactly the same here for our auxes or our 10 mixes here. So if I go to mix 1, now let's say for example we've set up stage left, center, stage right, and drum fill on our mixes. We can easily then start sending out in exactly the same way we would our left-right mix or our effects. If I press the mix 1, let's say the vocalist that stood at that position wants to hear maybe some kick drum, a bit of snare, maybe lots of vocal, maybe some keys, and maybe some other sounds here as well. Maybe the centre wedge, maybe that's just the main singer and they just really want to hear themselves because they're right in front of the drum kit, they don't really need to hear a lot else. And then maybe the keys player who's on stage right, maybe they want a bit of kick, bit of snare, quite a lot of bass and a bit of main vocal as an example. So we've easily set up 4 independent mixes, or say 3, now 4, and we can flick between them, which I think is a really simple way of working with monitors and also getting a monitor mix right. One of the things I would stress is when you're using the free Q app, which comes on for the iPad, you can also take control of that as well yourself. So if you're using maybe this in a studio setup to feed a headphone amp or something like that, you can then connect to the Wi-Fi router you connect on the rear, and then you can easily take control of that mix as well. Same for left and right. Sometimes you turn up to do a gig and you haven't got the luxury of a front of house really, slap bang in the middle of the stage, but you can walk around maybe the crowd area to sort of really get the mix right. So that's a really cool feature about that. Next up with our outputs, and I've mentioned a lot about the inputs and the processing that comes in. Now on our outputs, one of the things I will stress, every single output has a parametric EQ, a graphic and a compressor as well. So not only has it got a gate, compressor, parametric, etc., and a fully recall preamp coming on the input, on the output we've also got some really useful processing as well. Now again, the purpose of that, and we're talking monitors, let's talk about the graphic EQ. Now I've just pushed the on-screen touchscreen, to bring up the GUI really for the graphic. Now if I press this fader flip button here for the GEQ, that now takes me into my graphic mode. Now if I press it again, it will go up another stage, and if I press it again, it goes back to our mix. So let's say, for example, what do we want to do with monitors? Well, we want to ring out, sort all the resonant frequencies out that may cause us feedback in the live setup. So we select the mix using the mix 1, press the fader flip. We can then use these faders as dedicated, you can see the screen changing here. You can now start to actually ring out your monitors using that. Now, obviously the 24 and the 32 have larger and more faders, so they have a little bit more option there for being able to take control. So with the Q16 it is staged. What I like about it though, it does overlap quite well, because as we all know, there's always going to be that one problem frequency. Instead of going through several different pages, it will kind of overlap, so you can kind of see exactly where you're working with. Now, one of my pet hates, and I'm sure a lot of yours are as well, is when you see something as hideous as that. But we want to reset it, we want to get back to where we are. We can easily just use the select keys, and then that will reset my fader back to its kind of 0 position for the graphic, I'll add. So that's a really, really quick way of getting going with that. Now again, maybe we want to be a little bit more clinical, so let's come out of the graphic EQ and we'll come to our parametric EQ. So again, we can use that one knob per function kind of thought process here and easily sculpt our mix as well. Again, same thing with a compressor. Maybe we're using one of these dedicated mix outputs for a set of in-ear monitors perhaps. We can put a limiter straight on that to protect the artist's hearing, so we make sure it really doesn't exceed a certain level. And maybe a lot of people do often say that they want a little bit more sort of low end or something. You can enhance that using the parametric, for example, as well. So very, very powerful console in such a small format desk. So we talked a little bit about now input and the outputs and the effects. Some of the really kind of neat features which I like about this, which is the under the hood sort of setting, if you like. Now, we've talked mainly about just getting things going. Now, if we come into our custom layer, now I pressed both my layer and my sort of bottom layer buttons here, and now I've gone into this amber light. So that means under my custom layer, I can now assign this to do absolutely anything I want. So there's a few different ways to work with this. Now, I use 2 examples. Say for example, this venue is used in a venue, and on a Friday and a Saturday night it's a music venue, so you want to have all the features of the desk and you've got an in-house engineer. But maybe Monday to Friday it's a comedy, Monday to Thursday should I say, it's a comedy venue as an example. And all they're going to need to do is have a little bit of audio playback from a media player and maybe just a microphone, but there's not going to be an engineer there. So we can use some of the features of the Q16 to really be able to make sure that that desk is protected and your system is protected. So let's assign that. So under the setup page, under control, I can then select my custom layer. So let's say for example channel 1 will be my local connection, which is connected a wireless mic or a wired microphone or whatever, connected to my physical local channel 1. Next up on channel 2, I don't want that to be channel 2 on the back, I want that to be my 3.5mm input here, so if a performer turns up with a media player, they can connect that easily on the 3.5 jack straight into here, and then they'll have that channel dedicated for the level of that. So I just use the encoder underneath the touchscreen here and find stereo 3. So now, all these other faders do nothing until you assign them to do something. So for example now, you know that that's the volume for your mic and that's the volume for your media player. It really is that simple to make that custom layer do anything you want. Now, there wouldn't be any point in doing all this unless you could save it. Now, we can have up to 100 different scenes saved within this desk. Now, scenes are a really nice way to take a snapshot of the mixer. So, say for example you're working, as I just mentioned, with that a venue, you could maybe save it as bar setup 1 or something like that. You can then set different passcodes on that as well, so actually you can make that as a very basic level of use. So you can also make things safe, like your input routing, your mix routing, and also things that you don't want to filter or you maybe want filtered. So for example, we don't want the input patch changing, or maybe we don't want our mix sends changing. You can easily use the block button and block out certain functionality. So for example, if you're the owner of the company or you're the engineer that uses it, you have full admin rights. You can do whatever you want within that scene. but maybe you've got another customer or a user that's a bit more of a basic user. You don't want them to get into any mischief or get themselves into a situation they're not sure what they've done. Then you can easily lock that using the scene. So really, really powerful setup for such as, again, small format desk. And obviously it's the same. I must stress the operating system and the workflow is the same on the 16, the 24 and the 32. Now going back to our setup for our custom layer. Now I've already mentioned that this desk does actually have an inbuilt sound card. So maybe it could be used in the studio setup. Now one of the things I absolutely love about this is if I now scroll all the way to MIDI, I use the function key here to easily set up MIDI. And that just basically copies the last setting. So if you've done channel 1, it'll be channel 2, 3, 4, 5, or if it's MIDI, it'll make all the channels MIDI. So now we've set up, this is now a fully fledged MIDI controller. So for example, say you've used this desk in a live environment to mix your band, but actually back at your studio, you're using the multi-channel sound card, which is built in. It's giving me my 18 in and 18 out sound card. But also, we then want to take control of maybe our favourite DAW. It will also, there's a free app available on the Allen Heath website, which is will give you basically either Huey or Mackie control emulation. So it will work with Pro Tools, it will work with Ableton and Logic, etc. So really, really neat feature again, and just giving even more to this very, very compact, powerful package. And again, all of this information can be saved under your scene data as well. While we're in setup, I'm just going to quickly mention this as well. We've also got 4 dedicated soft keys. Now we've obviously got more on the 24 and the 32. Okay, so while we're on the setup page, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the soft keys. So we've seen how we can set up our custom layer to do all matter of things from any kind of channel or maybe to be in a MIDI controller. So under the soft keys, maybe we want to assign our soft keys to be things like a mute group or something like that. We can easily assign that to do that. Now notice this one's blinking. Now if I look on number 2, it says it's the tap tempo left and right for effects 2. So if I go back to my effects page and let's say effects 3, we want to assign to be soft key 1, just for the sake of argument. So this has got a lot faster tap time already for some reason in there, so wherever the last demo was with this. So now let's go back to our setup page and click on soft key. And soft key 1, instead of it doing mute group, I'm going to say tap tempo left and right. And I'll tell it effects number 3. Click apply. Now suddenly that's going very, very quickly, which corresponds to what's going on the actual user interface there as well. So now we've just done a tap tempo, and that then corresponds on screen. So it really is that simple to work with. So under setup as well, this is where we do all kind of things as well, like when we set up our connection to the network using the Wi-Fi router, and also things such as our output patching as well and how things will work, and also our monitor output as well. So I must stress that the Q series, like the GLD and the iLive, is compatible with the Allen Heath Me 1 system as well. So again, if it's gone into maybe a house of worship or again a studio or maybe a live sound setup where they don't have a monitor engineer, that really is a cool feature to be able to have 40 channels of audio coming straight down our Cat5 cable to our stage box, and then maybe daisy chain it off from that. So it's a very, very, very powerful system, again, for such a small little format desk. We've also got, and this is one of the later firmware updates, has given us MMC control as well. So remember, like I've mentioned already about doing our MIDI setup, maybe we can assign our soft keys to do things like stop, play and record as an example. So with our Huey or Mackie emulation, we're easily able to take control of our DAW in our custom layer, and then we can also maybe do some transport controls as well using our soft keys. So very, very powerful little setup. We've obviously talked a little bit about now the MMC and setting that up as well. Now, one of the things I think is a really, really cool thing about using this desk specifically for recording is the fact that when you're using that multi-channel sound card to record directly into your DAW, you can also use the Q drive to record audio directly to the drive at the same time. So it actually gives you backup recording redundancy as well. So say for example, goodness forbid, you know, your laptop gets some beer or something spilt on it in a live setup. Stranger things have happened, I'm sure. If you have this Q drive safely underneath the desk, then perhaps that will still record our 18 channels of broadcast 48K WAV as well. So it gives you a really nice bit of peace of mind working with the two different types of recording sort of options with this desk. And that's the same across the QU-16, the 24 and the 32. I keep saying it, they're very, very similar, the 16, the 24 and the 32. With the 24, we've got 4 group outputs, but also dedicated matrix output as well. So if you wanted to maybe work with delay towers on a larger gig or something like that. The 32, which is the most recent, one of the more recent Qs, that one will give you the 4 group outputs, but also will give you 2 matrix outs as well, and a larger screen. And more recently, and the most recent to be announced, is the Q pack. Now that one very much has this sort of a lot of the functionality, but it doesn't have the faders. So it's still a 19-inch rack format, but it's a really, really nice little product for using in an install or somewhere where you can use maybe the iPad for mixing on it. For more information about the QU-16 and also to find out more information about the other desks in future videos, then visit the link beneath the video about this to keep up to date with the latest information from Studiospares. I'd just like to stress this is $17.99 recommended retail price, and again keep up to date via the Studiospares websites for more info. Thank you.